Hi, team. Welcome to 10 Talks. Today's conversation is all about your gut. And yes, the whole world is talking about it. And there's a reason why is it is so valuable to really our peak performance, our ability to show up and have the life that we want. And it's amazing that it all has to do with our gut. And it's something that we're now talking about. What a gift that we get to talk about it, learn about it. We're going to take you on a journey of really understanding gut health, why it's important, and most importantly, how do you want to own your own gut health and really be able to make choices, make decisions based on setting yourself up to win your day, win your choices, win what you're eating, win your sleep, win everything that really matters. And so we have our doctor, Dr. Hunter is with us, and she's going to coach us up on gut health and really lead us into winning strategies, talking about performance barriers. Again, I want you to make this personal for you. I want you to be able to hear our words of wisdom, get coached, and most importantly, start living differently because you've listened to this conversation. Today, we're going to talk about leaky gut, the gut brain, just really starting to get that foundation of what's going on in my gut, why does it matter, and why is it so valuable? So, Dr. Hunter, thank you so much for being on our team. And I'd like to start today's conversation with leaky gut.
Yeah, thank you, Carlette. And so leaky gut syndrome is something that the idea of this has been around for a while, but I think really having Western science and physicians take this as a serious concern has been evolving over the last couple of years. And so people are always pretty happy when I start talking about it as a physician because a lot of people deal with these symptoms and um, it's kind of the underlying process that what's happening in my gut affects my total body health and leaky gut syndrome specifically can lead to really a cascade of health problems. So when we think about what is leaky gut or why does gut health matter, we started talking about the microbiome in our last session, and that's really kind of that powerhouse of not only digestion, but secondary processes that really help us have optimal health, controlling inflammation, dealing with our immune system. And the premise of leaky gut syndrome is that if your gut health is not in alignment, it really affects not only the integrity of our actual intestinal barrier, but also the role of the microbiome in helping maintain that intestinal barrier. So if you think about it, the lining of your intestine is one cell thick. So there is one cellular layer, microns thick between the stool in your intestinal tract and your bloodstream.
Wow. Yeah. Crazy in terms of how thin that is.
Right. And it's that way for a reason, right? We want nutrient absorption. We want to be taking in the good things from the food that we eat. However, there's a lot of stuff in there that we don't want to be absorbing. And so really that the tightness of the connection between those cells and how well that single cell lining of your gut is highly important. And the other thing that exists there to protect us is basically a layer of mucus. And this mucus layer is actually a lot of cross-linked carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates and water. And our gut microbiome really directly impacts how thick that mucus layer is and keeps it intact. Because what we know is when we don't feed the microbiome what it wants, it will still eat and it's going to actually eat away at that mucus layer. So the thicker the mucus layer, the more protection you have as far as the toxins and other things that are in our stool, that are going to be excreted. We want to get them out of our body. So that mucus layer is really integral to protecting that single cell layer between the bloodstream and the contents of your colon.
And so, how do we get that really, thick and healthy and absorbing for us?
Yeah, so there are many things that we can control, and some of the things that really impact the health of the gut and lead to leaky gut syndrome are, really common things. So stress is a very big one. We're going to talk extensively in our next session about the gut brain axis, right? That bi-directional communication of our mental stress and physical stress and how it affects our gut and how the microbiome and the health of the microbiome actually affect our stress levels as well. But really making sure that when we are in an optimum state as far as our mental health and managing stress, that can really help to protect the microbiome and also decrease abdominal symptoms. When we talk about leaky gut syndrome, people might say, well, what does that look like? And it really looks like different things for different people, because a lot of what happens is that when that lining is not intact, things are getting through that we don't want.
Yeah.
So toxins, extra proteins that really stimulate our immune system in not a great way. Last time we talked about how poor gut health can relate to autoimmune diseases. And this is one theory of how these, some proteins are actually produced by the microbiome that negatively impact us, right? So if those get across the gut barrier, then our immune system actually starts reacting to them. And those proteins look a little bit like our cells sometimes. So this is one theory about how autoimmune diseases can develop is through poor gut health and that the degradation of that barrier. And really we're talking about inflammation, right? When when the gut is not in alignment, when that mucus barrier is thin, when that intestinal lining is disrupted, it really kind of wreaks havoc on the body. So it shows up in a lot of different ways. These are, things that we talked about last time as signs that your gut health may not be in alignment. But, you know, really those abdominal symptoms, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, we're going to talk about that a lot more when we kind of go through some common gut concerns and how we can impact that. But also the inflammation and the autoimmune things, and thinking about things like asthma and seasonal allergies, right? How is that related to gut health? Well, again, our bodies are being exposed to things that we should be getting rid of, and that things are becoming inflamed, a little bit more reactive. Our mental health, our fatigue levels, are we sleeping well? All of these things can be interrelated. And also our skin health. Do you have problems with acne? Are you having eczema and other kind of inflammatory skin conditions? So besides just the GI symptoms that we can think of when the gut is not in alignment, these symptoms kind of cascade out to the rest of the body.
And what would be some particular symptoms that, you've shared a lot of ideas here, but if I'm just starting to become aware of this, I'm a bit of a rookie at understanding the power of my gut health. And all of a sudden, I do notice things, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm more of a 6 or a 7. Like I'm just not really in that peak performance space. What would be some symptoms that could be showing up that I could now relate that to it being gut health?
Yeah, I mean, just some brain fog, right? Maybe you're not concentrating or really on task, on target the way you want to be. Fatigue, just kind of general malaise, right? I'm just not myself. Maybe I've got a little stomach discomfort, even if it's not pain, just bloating or just feeling unwell. Uh, Again, could be very subtle, affecting your sleep, right? And so you're not sleeping well, so you're really not performing the way you want to. So again, a lot of us will think, oh, if it's in my gut, I'm going to feel it as pain or gas or something like that, but it really can be more subtle. And so when you start noticing some of those things, maybe think about, um, you know, as you asked before, what are the things that cause this to
Right.
happen? So the stress levels, as we've mentioned, really our diet is huge, as we kind of discussed last time, and we'll get way more into in our nutrition segment, of really what we put in our body either feeds our microbiome or hinders it, right? And it either builds that biodiversity, so really develops that rainforest with all our different team members
Mhm.
working for us
Yeah.
and working together, or really kind of creates that barren wasteland, Arctic tundra or desert situation where there's just a couple of bacteria types and maybe they're not really doing what we need to do. So really looking at our diet, when you start thinking about your performance changing, like you've been staying up late
Mhm.
and cramming for that test, or, have you been over exercising and not recovering and not fueling your body with plant foods, fruits and vegetables, lots of water, so
Mhm.
you can really heal and recover. So we know that nutrition is a huge part of that. Also, if you've been ill, right? If you've
Mm.
had a gastrointestinal illness or maybe got food poisoning, those types of things really reset the gut and can
Mm.
actually cause quite a bit of imbalance in the gut microbiome. Some of those common kind of foodborne illnesses or gastrointestinal viruses really wreak havoc on the gut microbiome. They produce toxins. That's kind of why we get the watery diarrhea and the vomiting. And so that can be a real trigger for gut irritation.
Yeah, and so what I'm thinking is, what's the difference between all these symptoms that you've brought up? Could be lots of different variations in terms of brain fog or just feeling a little tired or, even an upset stomach or bloating. How do I know the difference between it being my gut health versus something that I ate or just kind of one night that I didn't sleep that well? I really want to be able to own the difference between an off night or just an off meal versus really understanding that my gut is not being set up for optimum performance.
Yeah, so I would look at how consistent are these symptoms for me, right? If it's one time or a one off, could just be, you're feeling under the weather, something's going on. But if it's, several times a week, I'm having bloating or diarrhea or these other symptoms, or, I just wake up and I'm not refreshed at all, or, by the end of the day, I've got a lot of brain fog and fatigue and I'm reaching for caffeine or sugar to try to boost me up. That might be a clue that, some of these practices you might have are not working for you and that the gut is really affected overall. And specifically, when we talk more about nutrition, it's the highly processed foods. Added sugar is a huge cause of disruption in the microbiome. And we also think about things like artificial sweeteners, colors, preservatives, those types of things that were not on the list in the grocery store 100
Yeah.
years ago,
Yes.
that our bodies really don't know what to do with that, right?
Mhm.
It's very foreign and really toxic if it builds
Yeah.
up in our bodies. So when we think about how our daily practices can add up to, good gut health or poor gut health, really looking at what am I consuming on a regular basis and how could it be contributing to some of these signs and symptoms of leaky gut. And we know that people suffering from leaky gut syndrome are more likely to have food sensitivities and sometimes even food allergies. So again, when you think about that mucus layer getting thinner and thinner and those cells, being exposed to more toxins, you can think about more things that we don't want coming through. And again, it's our immune system reacting to the exposure that can cause some of these food sensitivities and intolerances. One tip that I like to bring up and has been something that's been proven to improve that mucus barrier in the gut is thinking about consuming bone broth. So this is pretty readily available now at most grocery stores. And we actually have a great recipe for you to try if that's something you want to try out for your gut health. But there are specific amino acids in the bone broth that we know interact with the microbiome and also help to improve that mucus layer. So it can be a simple tool that you could add to your routine, once a day, a couple times a week, especially if you're having a lot of these gut symptoms and can really kind of relieve some of those symptoms as well.
Can we do too much of the bone broth? Is it okay to have it every day? Once we get excited about this and we think this is the winning strategy, can we overdo it?
I think I'm always an everything in moderation type of person, right? We can overdo almost anything, but if you follow our recipe and you're making it at home, at least you kind of know what's going in to your bone broth, right? I mean, a lot of these commercially prepared formulations might have added salt, definitely, right? So we know that bone broth contains significant amino acids, and that's from the collagen that's found when the bones are cooked and the cartilage is broken down. And glutamine is one amino acid that I wanted to just highlight briefly. It's really been shown to maintain the integrity of that intestinal lining. So, keep that single cell layer really healthy and optimized. And there's also gelatin in bone broth, which really comes out of the bones being cooked down. And that's very helpful for gut integrity as well. So we have the recipe for you. You're going to be able to access that. We really want you to give it a try. If trying bone broth is something you think might help your leaky gut symptoms, we'd like you to try it out and stat it up. Let us know how it works for you.
And if you don't want to do bone broth, if you're a vegetarian or this isn't something that works for you, is there one that you can buy that you really recommend that's, or what are we looking for if we're going to buy it versus making our own?
I think anytime I have people look at what's commercially available, I always want to look at how many ingredients are in this, right? I mean, if it's 20 ingredients, half of them I can't pronounce, a lot of preservatives, things like that, it's not something I'm going to recommend. So really looking at, um, what's the first ingredient and how much sodium is in this product, that sort of thing. So really kind of keeping it under 5 ingredients and I mean, it's hard to recommend a bone broth for vegans because it is made from animal products, right? Their bones are the main ingredient. Um, but you can also just take a look, at your diet and other things that you consume. Bone broth's not the only answer, right? Kind of adjusting what other processed foods might be in our diet. How much sugar am I getting, right? Or looking at your stressors. So this is one tool and something to consider, something we have some science behind, but it's not the only answer.
Well, the great part about it is you can make a decision to be able to invest in your health according to what's missing or what you want to do. And like you said, just try it up, stat it up on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is low, 10 is fabulous. About how long would a person need to have put bone broth into their rituals and routines to be able to see a difference?
I really think about any change that you're going to make, you need to give yourself a couple of weeks to see how this is going, right? I mean, again, that single cell layer of your intestine, it replaces itself very frequently. So in 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to notice a difference by any of these changes that you make, right? If you're focusing on stress reduction, if you're focusing on pulling out added sugar. So 10 to 14 days is probably a good amount of time to see, how does this sit with my body? I also encourage people when they're really trying to say, is this working for me? Make one change at a time,
Right. Yes.
right? If you change 5 things, we don't know which variable is helping or hurting. So really commit to 10 days or 14 days to really make a change, commit to that. And that's a good amount of time for you to know, is this strategy going to be helpful to me or not?
Well, and what's so valuable about being able to use the 10 days or the 2 weeks is that, pick one thing, just the power of one, and really being able to make one change. And while you make that one change, stat your day throughout the day. Am I less tired? How am I feeling? Because once you start feeling good, you're going to kind of forget how you used to feel. And we want to be able to track that and notice and capture it and say, okay, this week, this is how I chose to win my gut health. I'm going to make this one change. And I'm going to stat up how I'm feeling all day long to really be able to determine, is this what I want to add? Is this what I want to invest in or not as we move on to the next one? So, what are some common gut performance barriers that are showing up, or just anything that would be working against my gut health?
Yeah. And what I really want to bring to people's attention is common gut concerns that people have and how they might be related to the microbiome as well as other kind of factors in our lives that could be contributing. So the first kind of common gut area that I want to talk about is something that we call irritable bowel syndrome. So this is different from inflammatory bowel disease, which people may know about from ulcerative colitis or Crohn's diseases. Those are more autoimmune diseases. But this inflammatory bowel syndrome, IBS, is more of I get a lot of gut pain, sometimes associated with nausea, very often associated with either diarrhea or constipation. And it's really kind of this group of symptoms that people tend to suffer with for a long time. It's very common. We don't understand exactly what causes it. Um, and for some people, the symptoms are very severe and they're somewhat unpredictable, right? So, um, some people might have these symptoms every day. Some people might have kind of what we call flare ups, right? Where things maybe have stabilized, but then something happens to trigger a new episode of IBS symptoms. And we know that there are several things that you can do to manage IBS symptoms. And this might be something you want to actually see your physician about. If I'm sitting here talking to you and you're like, wow, that's me. I didn't know I had a syndrome. Um, so, go get it checked out, right? Don't just take my word for it. But when we think of the things that can positively impact and manage IBS, one of them is looking for those triggers. So, as Carlette was just suggesting, write down your symptoms on your calendar. Mark how many bad days you have in a week or in a month. And when you start to have the awareness of, oh, this isn't normal, I shouldn't be feeling like this, then you can take a step back and say, okay, well, what did I do last week before I had a flare for 3 days and had severe pain or a lot of diarrhea? So when we can identify the triggers, then we can kind of strategize, right? So oftentimes it's foods that are triggers for people. For some people, dairy is a big trigger. And I think we've talked about why in lifestyle medicine we recommend avoiding or reducing dairy. It's highly inflammatory. And again, when we're talking about gut health, inflammation and reducing the things that we know to cause inflammation can be really powerful. Again, choosing healthy foods, less processed foods, less added sugar. And for IBS, managing your stress is really huge. A lot of people know, if they have a work deadline, if they have a fight with a friend or family member, that can be a really big place to trigger. And sometimes these symptoms are severe enough that you might need medications, right? Uh, Something to help with the diarrhea or help with the constipation. For a lot of these gut concerns, probiotics can be a helpful management tool, and exercise is also really important. We have a whole segment on exercise and the microbiome, um, but you might see a common theme coming out with some of these too. That again are 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. We're going to be touching on all of these, but these are some things specific for IBS that could be helpful.
And when you say, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, maybe I have a leaky gut, I maybe should go get it checked out. How do you get it checked out with your doctor?
So it would mostly be booking an appointment to say, these are the symptoms I'm having. Does this sound consistent with IBS or leaky gut? Now, again, the average PCP, if you come in and say leaky gut, they might roll their eyes at you or something and maybe give you an IBS label instead. If your symptoms are severe or they're interfering with your ability to kind of do life the way you want to, that's really when I recommend seeing a physician. If you're missing work because of these symptoms or you have to cancel plans because you never know if you're going to have explosive diarrhea, those are reasons to get it checked out and make sure it's not something more serious. Sometimes people, especially with an upset microbiome, could have an overgrowth of bacteria,
Mm.
harmful bacteria. Um, there are actually parasites that people can get exposed to and live with for a long time that can cause gut symptoms. So sometimes it's worth a little bit of a workup, maybe some lab work, maybe some stool studies in a severe case. But we want to make sure we're not glossing over symptoms. So I would really base it on severity and frequency. And again, it's building some awareness around that too.
So,
Yep.
Dr. Hunter, we're really getting educated on leaky gut. Thank you very much for that. I want to go into just kind of the performance barriers, basically the things that get in the way of me being able to live the life I want and peak perform. I want to talk about the constipation or diarrhea, the things that really are very uncomfortable, and yet they're not something we talk about or even want anybody to know about. So, what are some winning strategies when that shows up in our life?
Yeah, and constipation can mean different things for different people, right? Some people move their bowels every day, and if that doesn't happen, they feel constipated, right? Some people go a little longer. Now, we really think about daily elimination of your bowels as kind of a sign of a healthy functioning microbiome. So, if you are constipated, it can lead to some abdominal pain. It can lead to hard to pass and uncomfortable stools. And the good news is we have a lot of things we can do to help constipation. Some of the things that cause us is poor diet, highly processed, not enough fiber in the diet, really not focusing on water intake, or if you are exercising or even just eating a higher fiber diet, you need to be increasing that water intake. It's actually really important to keep your stools moving. Also, not being active enough. Our gut is muscle, and being upright and having gravity help out a little bit is important. And also, kind of that daily movement helps to fully move things through the GI tract. And also, when your body's telling you it's time to go, we need to listen up. We need to pay attention. So, ignoring your urges actually kind of shuts down that signal back and forth from the brain and the gut and can lead to more constipation. So, making sure you're listening to your body when nature calls, take care of business. And we know that medical conditions, medications, and stress, in addition to these other lifestyle things, can definitely have an impact on both constipation and diarrhea. So, again, it's the awareness
Yeah.
about, maybe there's something I need to do about this. So, just as we talk about the causes,
Hmm.
focusing on fiber, more fruits and veggies, more whole grains, drinking your water, getting your movement in, right? 8,000 steps a day, 10,000 steps a day, going to the bathroom if you need to, and then using medications like over the counter laxatives, things to kind of help soften the stools or help your stools move through might be part of a treatment plan. Anytime we recommend medications, you might be want to work with your own physician on that. But there are a lot of over the counter products that can help with intermittent constipation. And there's more information for you in the workbook on that.
And so, if we're not constipated and we have diarrhea, in terms of completely the opposite, what's happening?
Right. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about foodborne illnesses and infections that can be causing diarrhea. As a physician, that's always something I want to kind of rule out. Um, again, diarrhea means different things to different people. For somebody, if it's just a little less firm than they like, that seems like diarrhea. In the medical term, we really
Okay.
think about having 3 or more loose bowel movements
Okay.
a day is what gives you diarrhea. So one loose stool, maybe you ate more fiber than you
Yeah.
normally do, right? Um, Having food intolerances. So a lot of people, with lactose intolerance, they may notice that it speeds up the movement through the GI tract, right? That's kind of one of constipation is things have slowed down. They're not moving fast enough. Diarrhea is the opposite. Things are going through too fast. And that can long term lead to problems with I'm not absorbing my nutrition, right? Um, Again, medications, medical conditions, and uh, viruses like gastrointestinal illnesses, these things can all be causes of diarrhea. And again, that overarching stress and anxiety, the gut brain connection, we'll talk more, but it can contribute to that speeding up of the gut and diarrhea.
So, enough about figuring that out in terms of just how we're eliminating our food. What about if we're getting heartburn and it's really staying inside and we're really struggling with that? What do we do with heartburn?
Yeah, so there's kind of two sides of that coin too. Heartburn and maybe some belching associated with
Mm.
that. And then also some people have the opposite problem of flatulence or gas that they don't like, right? So, you know, um, flatulence or excessive gas, we can adjust that with some of these same things that we're talking about with adjusting for constipation and diarrhea, our diet, working on the microbiome. There are also some medical conditions that might predispose you to that. With heartburn, it's really our stomach acid is getting into our esophagus. And that could be caused by a couple of different reasons. Either you're overproducing stomach acid, maybe because you're eating a lot of highly acidic foods, or it's some other lifestyle factors that the actual junction between the stomach and the esophagus is getting modified. It's loosening. So stomach acid is allowed to come back up. So um, things like alcohol actually relax that junction. Eating too close to bedtime means that your food is still in your stomach, still being digested, and so stomach acid could come up when you lay down, right? We use gravity to help move things down the system. If we're kind of in that horizontal position, it can go the other way. Also, being overweight or obese can affect how much pressure is on the stomach and affect that as well. So when you have heartburn, people say, well, what is that? It can be a burning or discomfort in your chest or your esophagus, sometimes a sour, bitter taste in your mouth, especially if you wake up in the morning with the sour, bitter taste. You might have had some heartburn overnight. And so really like with a lot of these things, having the awareness and saying, gosh, I had a lot of heartburn last night. What did I do? Oh, I had 3 martinis and, chocolate right before bed.
Right.
Um, those might be your triggers,
Mm.
right? So identifying what is a trigger for me, specifically for heartburn, smaller and maybe even more frequent meals or smaller meals in the evening, right? Eat your bigger meal earlier in the day when you know you're going to be up and have more time to digest that. Really not laying down right after a meal. We've talked before about 3 hours between your last calories and bedtime just to really optimize, is everything through the stomach and moving down the GI tract. If there's a chronic problem for you, one lifestyle recommendation is actually just to make the head of your bed higher, you
Oh,
know, um, or they sell special pillows called wedge pillows that kind of put your head higher up than your gut when
yeah.
you're sleeping. So that's a kind of an easy modification, although we can make other changes better for our lifestyle in general that will reduce these symptoms. And a lot of our lifestyle changes, when we focus on a plant focused diet, less added fat and oil and sugar, less alcohol, it's going to help us with weight loss too.
Mm.
Um, and again, we talked about the alcohol as a contributor. Smoking can also loosen that sphincter and make that worse. And you can, again, over the counter medications are pretty widely available for the treatment of heartburn. It's really trying to control the amount of acid in the stomach. So if you think about Tums, or, it's basically a calcium chew,
Mhm.
and calcium is kind of neutralizing to stomach acid. So that might be an occasional go to. But again, if you're having these symptoms frequently,
Right.
this is when we recommend you talk to your doctor about it and see what next steps might be for you.
So, what about fermented foods?
Yeah, fermented foods are a great option when you're trying to improve your microbiome health. And also, if you have some of these common gut concerns, adding some fermented foods is a good way to, again, it's a tool in our toolbox to see, is this going to work for me? So, when I say fermented foods, what do I mean? I mean, most people know about yogurt,
Mm.
right? Fermented foods are really foods that have bacteria in them that are actually acting on the sugars and the carbohydrates in those foods to create byproducts that we call fermentation. So, miso is a common one in Asian cultures, such as kimchi as well. Kefir is another dairy product that's like a yogurt drink. Tempeh is a fermented soybean product. Sauerkraut and pickles, are fermented cabbage and cucumbers. And those are just a few examples. There's lots more. Kombucha is another very popular fermented food that we know about. So, having some fermented foods every day is actually a really good way to improve your gut health. But if you're new to fermented foods, and if all of those names I just mentioned are like, what is Dr. Hunter even talking about? This is when you get to try some things out, right? It's the new skills, the new ideas. Um, so start with something you know. Maybe it's a little bit of plain yogurt every day. Maybe it's trying kombucha or kefir, and really small portions. Thinking about having them as part of your meal or snack, like pickled cabbage is a great addition to a salad or a sandwich. And just think about small portions.
Yeah.
Again, if you're buying these commercially, some of the fermented sauerkrauts and kimchis have a high sodium content. So
Mm.
think of it as a condiment, or a side dish. You
Oh,
don't want to be
yeah.
consuming maybe vast quantities. And then also try making your own. So we will have some other recipes for you as well, to make your own kombucha and try some fermented foods.
So, if you're dairy free or need to be dairy free, or dairy upsets your stomach, and yet you want to really go for this and add the one fermented food that you could do, you're not a fan of pickles or cabbage, is there something else kind of in the toolbox that it's like, okay, I could add this into my diet?
Well, kefir is a really interesting tool because you don't need dairy to
Ah.
have kefir. So you can actually make kefir from water. You can make kefir at home. You can make soy kefir or soy yogurt even. So don't think that the vehicle has to be a cow's milk product. Um, you can make yogurt from almond milk, cashew milk, any
Yeah.
of those kinds of things. So, and there's a lot of readily available starter packets
Mm.
for yogurt making and kefir making. And really the only difference is really the type of um, microorganisms you're using and kind of the percentages. Some of it's also the temperature that it's prepared at, how long you let it sit. Longer is going to make it thicker, uh, shorter is going to make it thinner. So don't think that you're limited to getting fermented foods if you have a dairy intolerance. You might have to try some new things, right? Make and maybe make it at home. But I've made kefir at home. It's very easy.
And you can also buy it at the store, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are dairy free options for all of those.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Hunter, as always, love our conversation. Today was all about leaky gut and really, what is it? Do I have it? If I have it, what do I do with it? And so, thank you for getting us coached up, team. Really want to encourage you to anchor into the power of one. What is one thing that you want to do different for 10 to 14 days? Stat it up, be very intentional about really honoring you, being for you, setting your mind, your body up for peak performance. And so start by the beginning of the day when you wake up, stat on a scale of 1 to 10, how was my sleep? Go to breakfast on a scale of 1 to 10, how's my breakfast choices? How's my energy level? Is it good? And when am I running out of energy? When am I, from a stress perspective, getting too stressed out? And when I get stressed out, am I eating or am I doing something that really isn't for me? This is a really interesting journey to invest in, to be for you, and to just enjoy the journey of discovering what's best for you, for your body, to really set you up to live that 10 life. So thank you, Dr. Hunter. Thank you, team, for being committed to winning your well-being.